The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or to view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
First of all, any questions from last lecture? Yes?
I have a question about the net present value from the point of currency's value. If the US dollar, the value of US dollar is getting weak and weak by year, is it possible net present value of US dollar is positive? On the other hand, net present value of euro could be negative.
Okay, so let me repeat the question to make sure everybody heard. The question about net present value is that is it possible that in one currency the net present value of a project is positive, but in a different currency it is negative? That's a very interesting question. And it turns out that the answer is staring us in the face right here. Now, remember, we're in a world of no uncertainty. So we know what future cash flows are going to be, and we know what future discount rates or discount factors are going to be. That's by assumption. And in that world, when I give you the value of a sequence of cash flows, this V sub 0, if I want to denominate it in dollars, then presumably all the cash flows have to be in dollars. If I want to denominate it in yen, then the cash flows have to be in yen. So strictly speaking, assuming that the exchange rates don't change over time, and that's, again, a big assumption, the question is, can I have a different result in terms of the sign of a net present value by changing the exchange rate? Any thoughts on that? What do you think? Yeah?
No.
No. Why?
Because currency have to be a positive number. And just to change the parameter before the real number that you have in order to get this currency we want.
Okay. So the answer is no, because the exchange rates always have to be positive, and presumably you're multiplying the cash flows by the same number, either positive of one number or positive another number. So when you multiply a sequence by a positive number, when you add that up, it is either still positive or still negative. In other words, you can factor it out, right? You sure? Yeah.
I had a question. When we're doing this in different currencies, you're saying there is no risk.
Yeah.
But is it possible to have different, the different currencies have different?
Well, right now we're not talking about risk. So let's hold that off for 7 or 8 lectures. I want to ask this question. Have I got it right? Are we agreed that no matter what you multiply it by, as long as it's a positive number, it can't change the sign, so the currency doesn't matter? Yeah, Ernest.
But the exchange rate, so the cash flows are at different times.
Yes.
So if your exchange rate is different at different times,
Yeah.
then it's not a same factor throughout
The assumption is that it's fixed. There's no uncertainty. But I didn't say it was the same. So you said that it was the same. I didn't. You're right. So Shlomi, you're right. If the exchange rate is the same over time, then when you multiply by one number, it's the same number for every cash flow. Then it factors out, and then you're multiplying V sub 0 by a positive number. So if V sub 0 is positive, it stays positive. If it's negative, it stays negative. But no uncertainty doesn't mean that it's fixed. So here's the subtlety. The subtlety is that if I assume that the exchange rate is fixed and known, but going up over time, whereas in US dollars it stays fixed, that makes a difference, right? So it's possible that if I change currencies and the currency is rapidly appreciating or rapidly depreciating, then you can actually change the net present value of the project. But it has to be the case that the particular path of the currency appreciation or depreciation is exactly opposite what's going on with the NPV. So the bottom line is you've got to do the calculation. And you have to use the currency that you care about. So if you're in US, you presumably care about getting paid in US dollars. You would use US dollars. If you're in Japan, you get paid in yen. You want to do it in yen, and you have to do the currency conversion. Now, when we talk about uncertainty, that's going to make it much more complicated. It's going to introduce another component of risk in our calculations that has to be dealt with. So we're going to come back to that. But that's a good question. Anybody else? Yes?
Last lecture used the term paper a number of times. Just wondering if you could give us a quick definition of that.
Of what?
Paper.
Paper. You mean this is a piece of paper?
Well, I don't think you were, I think you were commercial paper or you used it in
Right.
several different ways. So.
Yeah, so typically by paper, people mean a security. And commercial paper is a security that is a debt instrument that is basically an IOU. It's like a bond. So we'll come back to that when we talk about fixed income securities. But that's what I mean. By the way, you raise a good point. When I mention terminology, feel free to ask me, but in turn, I'm going to feel free to tell you, you may want to look that up in Brealey, Myers, and Allen, because I want you to read the book alongside of what we're doing in class, because you'll need to pick up this terminology, and we don't have enough time in this 20 lectures to cover all the terminology that you need to know. So don't assume that just because I haven't covered it in class or that I haven't defined it, that you don't need to know it. The textbook is there to help you with the supplementary material that I would like you to cover. So that's why we assign those chapters. Okay? Yeah, Justin.
Last time we talked about the common stock of Freddie and Fannie
Yes.
being worthless. Then I went home, read a news article, and they said the stock market jumps because they're being bailed out.
Right.
So is there a simple reason as to why we see such a massive increase in stock market?
In the stock market, while their stock has gone down.
Yeah.
Right. So that seems a little counterintuitive. I'm going to give you a 2-minute answer now, but then I'm going to give you a much deeper answer in about 3 or 4 lectures when we actually apply all of the framework we're developing to pricing common stock. So as I said, with Freddie and Fannie, there are 2 components. There are 2 sets of issues surrounding those companies. One is the value of the owner's equity, the folks who owned a piece of those companies. What are their investments worth? And the answer is very little. The second piece is that Freddie and Fannie have issued all sorts of IOUs, all sorts of obligations to counterparties. And the question is, what are those securities worth? The government bailing out Freddie and Fannie are basically saying, we will stand behind those IOUs. The shareholders of the company, sorry, you guys lost. The company has not done well. It's suffered a lot of losses. So the fact that you own a piece of the company means that what you own is now worthless. But the pieces of paper that the company has issued, we will assume that obligation as the US government and make good on those obligations. So the fact that those pieces of paper have much broader impact on the market as a whole, the fact that the US government is standing behind those pieces of paper will protect the stock market as a whole, because there's confidence that business conditions will not be as bad as we thought. So that's what explains the fact that the stock market as a whole went up. It's because the market environment has been stabilized. You can imagine what might have happened if Fannie and Freddie were to go under. Their pieces of paper, their IOUs, would be worthless, which means the folks that own those pieces of paper, now they have a bunch of worthless paper. And when that happens, there are repercussion effects for those businesses, and those businesses will end up losing money, which will have repercussions for the entire market as a whole.
So is that, so the amount that it went up shows how their paper was distributed to all these other companies?
It's a combination of how their paper was distributed, but more than that, I mean, there are many companies in the S&P 500, for example, that don't own any of this paper. So why would their stock be buoyed? It's because the business conditions have been stabilized, and there won't be any knock-on effects. A good example of this is Lehman Brothers. As many of you know, Lehman Brothers is a big player in these kinds of securities, and they are currently under a lot of pressure. Their stock prices dropped dramatically, even in the last few days, because they are a big mortgage lender and CDO investor, so they're actually hit pretty hard by all of this. And while the rescue of Freddie and Fannie has had some positive effects on Lehman's stock price, it still is under fire, and a lot of people want to get rid of it. Imagine if Freddie and Fannie weren't rescued. It's almost a sure thing that Lehman would have